Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. Okay, last week we finished the explanation of the Satipatthana Sutta. And this week we're going to take a passage from a sutta which gives a detailed explanation of one particular method that's expounded in the Satipatthana Sutta. This is Anapanasati, or mindfulness of breathing. And the passage that we're going to examine actually constitutes, we call this the heart or core of the famous Anapanasati Sutta, which is Sutta number 118 in the middle-length discourses. The only significant difference is that the Anapanasati Sutta has a somewhat long, we call it preamble or introductory passage, which builds up to mindfulness of breathing. But the core of the Satipatthana Sutta is exactly the same as the passage that constitutes this sutta that we will be studying. And so it seems that there was a fixed formula for the practice, the detailed practice of mindfulness of breathing, connecting it with the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 7 factors of enlightenment. And that core passage could be transferred from one place to another. In fact, it's even possible that the Anapanasati Sutta is a constructed sutta, that it was fashioned later by taking this core passage, which would have come from it comes from the Samyutta Nikaya. And all one has to do is to take this core passage out of its original context, put a preface, attach a preface to it in order to build up to mindfulness of breathing, and then one has the Anapanasati Sutta. And in fact, the same sutta that we have right here, now I'm on page 290, starting 290 in the book. The same sutta occurs in the Samyutta Nikaya, in the chapter called Anapana Samyutta, the connected discourses on mindfulness of breathing. The same sutta occurs in 4 slightly different ways. In the first version, which we have here, Ananda comes to the Buddha and asks him some questions, and then the Buddha gives the sutta as a response to those questions. In the second version, Ananda comes to the Buddha, and the Buddha poses the questions to Ananda himself, rhetorical questions, and then the Buddha supplies his own answers to those questions. In the third version, it's not Ananda, but a group of monks come to the Buddha and pose the same questions. And then the Buddha answers in exactly the same way. And in the fourth version, a group of monks comes to the Buddha And then the Buddha himself poses the questions and then answers his own questions. Okay, now, when Venerable Dhammadipa was here in, was it November? Yes. It was November. He gave a quite long explanation of this, basically the same passage from the Anapanasati Sutta. He explained it over a course of about 4 days, 5 days. So my presentation, my explanation will be somewhat compressed. If you like to get the full detailed elaboration by Venerable Dhammadipa, then I guess Sister Sudama isn't, she's not here today. But perhaps copies will be made available to Tuangyang Monastery, or next time you can just make a request to Sister Sudama. Okay, now what is special about this particular way of presenting Anapanasati that we find here? Well, actually two things are quite special. The first is that here we have Anapanasati, the practice of mindfulness of breathing, presented in terms of 16 aspects. In the Satipatthana Sutta, in the section on mindfulness of breathing, we find only 4 aspects presented. But here, the explanation, the detailed explanation of mindfulness of breathing is broken up, we can say, into a sequence of 16 aspects. Sometimes these are called 16 steps in the practice of mindfulness of breathing. But I think that description is misleading, because these are not sequential steps in that one follows one after the other, but there are 16 aspects which are interwoven, say mutually penetrating aspects in the practice of mindfulness of breathing. Okay, so that is the first thing that is significant, that we have here a presentation, a 16-fold presentation of mindfulness of breathing. The second thing that's significant is that these 16 steps will then be correlated with the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And then having correlated the 16 steps or 16 aspects with the 4 foundations of mindfulness, will then be shown that these 4 foundations of mindfulness lead into the practice of the 7 factors of enlightenment. Okay, so now we come to the beginning of the sutta, and Venerable Ananda comes to the Buddha and then asks, it seems to me like an artificial series of questions, a framed series of questions. Is there one thing which when developed and cultivated fulfills 4 things, and 4 things which when developed and cultivated fulfill 7 things, and 7 things which when developed and cultivated fulfill 2 things? Okay, then the Buddha replies that there is such a thing, one thing which fulfills 4 things, and so on. And then the Buddha says, what is that one thing? It is concentration by mindfulness of breathing. This is the one thing which, when developed and cultivated, fulfills the 4 satipatthanas, the 4 establishments of mindfulness. The 4 establishments of mindfulness, when developed and cultivated, fulfill the 7 factors of enlightenment, and the 7 factors of enlightenment, when developed and cultivated, fulfill vijja vimutti. That's true knowledge, higher knowledge, and liberation. Okay, so now the Buddha first sets out to explain how concentration by mindfulness of breathing is developed and cultivated so that it fulfills the 4 establishments of mindfulness. And here I have to call attention to the fact that what we have here is a presentation not simply of anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing, but this is anapanasati samadhi. That means samadhi or concentration gained by mindfulness of breathing. And so actually within this whole part of the Anapana Samyutta, the collected sayings on mindfulness of breathing, we have the focus shifts from simply mindfulness of breathing to anapanasati samadhi, to concentration, which is developed on the basis of mindfulness of breathing. Okay, so in answering, the Buddha first begins with the instructions on the basic practice, that the monk goes to the forest, to the foot of a tree, or to an empty hut, sits down, folds his legs crosswise, straightens his body, and sets up mindfulness in front of him. Then just mindful he breathes in, mindful he breathes out. Okay, what we're going to come to right here will be familiar to us already from the Satipatthana Sutta. Mindful he breathes in, mindful he breathes out. Breathing in long, he knows I breathe in long. Or breathing out long, he knows I breathe out long. Breathing in short, he knows I breathe in short. Or breathing out short, he knows I breathe out short. Okay, so this is the fundamental practice of mindfulness of breathing, which I explained in connection with the Anapanasati Samyutta, which I explained in connection with the Satipatthana Sutta. Now, one thing that is both interesting and intriguing in the classical way of explaining mindfulness of breathing that we meet with in the Theravada tradition, there is another scheme has come in which has pushed into the background the explanation of thinking. Which has pushed into the background the explanation of mindfulness of breathing that we find in the suttas. It seems that this other method of explanation, or we call it a systematic presentation of mindfulness of breathing, developed during the period when the commentaries were taking shape. And so this other scheme becomes the dominant framework for explanation in the Visuddhimagga, the path of purification. And I understand we also find the same principles of that scheme in the Yogacara Bhumi, which was the great treatise on meditation, on philosophy and meditation from the Yogacara school in northern India. And so this alternative method of explaining mindfulness of breathing must have been taking shape even before the southern and northern traditions divided and went their separate ways. And yet in both traditions, this alternative method comes to the forefront, and it drives the older canonical method explained in the suttas, drives it into the background. So I imagine if the Buddha were to come on the scene today and to think to himself, I wonder how my fellows are getting along with their practice of mindfulness and breathing. And he listens in to a traditional session in which a traditional monk is explaining mindfulness of breathing. First a look of puzzlement would appear on his face, and then he'll wonder, hey, that's not what I explained at all. What's happened? Okay, so there's other methods that's risen to a position of prominence, perhaps because it's very concrete and very practical. Okay, involves a number of steps. In the Pali tradition, we have, I think, 8 steps: counting, following, touching, fixing, observing, turning away, purification, and reviewing. And when Venerable Dhammadippa was giving his explanation, he followed this traditional Theravadan way of explanation, though he pointed out that he made it quite clear that he was aware that there are these 2 alternative different ways of explanation: the way that dominates within the tradition and the way deriving from the suttas. But he explained in detail the way deriving from the tradition. So in this method, one begins with counting the breaths. Then at a certain point, when one is able to focus on the breath through counting, then one drops the counting and one just follows the breath. Then in following the breath, one makes sure that the attention is on the point where the breath is touching either the nostrils, the inner part of the nostrils, or the upper lip where the breathing comes in and out. So one just keeps the attention on that point where one experiences the touch of the breath. Then as one does so over time, then one reaches fixing, which means meditative absorption or the jhanas. Then after one stabilizes the jhanas, then one goes into the 5th step, which is observing. That means observing the mental and the bodily and mental phenomena involved in the act of breathing in order to develop insight. Then when the insight comes to its peak, then there comes turning away, which means the arising of the world-transcending path. That's followed by purification, which is the attainment of the fruit. And then there comes the 8th step, which is reviewing. One reviews the whole process that one has gone through. But just to go through these 8 steps again. First, one counts the breath. When the counting is established, then one simply follows the breath going in and out without counting. As one is following the breath, then the 3rd step is actually an aspect of the 2nd, is attending to the touch sensation of the breath coming in and out, the touch point. Then eventually reaching the jhanas. 5th, that's the 5th step. 6th is attaining, the jhanas are the 4th step. 5th step is the development of insight. 6th step is the world-transcending path. 7th step is the attainment of the fruition, the fruit of the path. The 8th step is reviewing all of this.
So you said there were 10 steps and you described 8?
I said that there are...
Oh, I thought you said 10 steps.
No. Did somebody else hear me say 10 steps? Okay, because there are only 8. Okay, I don't want to give more attention now to this alternative scheme, which does seem to have a basis in practical experience. Even it seems to originate with the problem of instructing novice meditators with wandering minds how to keep track of the breath by introducing the method of counting. And then it passes on into the other stages. But here, in this sutta, we have the oldest presentation of mindfulness of breathing, which simply explains first, well, let us say the first sentence, which is the core of the whole practice, is just mindful he breathes in, mindful he breathes out. So that we could say is the essence of the whole practice. And everything that comes after that is just elaboration of that sentence. So perhaps this was an early way to keep the meditator aware of something more specific in the breath. So introducing the distinction between long breaths and short breaths. Breathing in long, he knows I breathe in long, or breathing out long, he knows I breathe out long. Then another distinction or point of distinction is the short breath. So the long breath and short breath are being contrasted. Breathing in short, he knows I breathe in short, or breathing out short, he knows I breathe out short. And I pointed out when I was explaining the Satipatthana Sutta that to myself this sequence moving from long breath to short breath seems counterintuitive, since it seems to me that when one begins the mindfulness of breathing, the breathing is going more quickly, and so the breaths are shorter. And then as the mind settles into the observation of the breath, as the bodily excitation settles down, then the breathing becomes quieter, more peaceful, and one will be breathing in, breathing out with long breaths. Doesn't that seem to be the case? I'm not sure whether I have an idiosyncratic breathing rate or not. So I think here by breathing in long, breathing out long, I don't know. Anyway, it seems counterintuitive to me. Does anybody have any idea about this? Okay, Suki. Wait, Jen is going to give you the microphone.
For the beginning the breather, meditator, it's not easy. Sometimes it's not easy to find the touching point, and when they practice with a kind of maybe it's really intentional, but if you breathe long and breathe in long and breathe out long, at the beginning, it's kind of easier to find that touching point. So I find that's helpful.
This is actually an interesting idea.
Then when your body becomes calmer, it's not a matter of long or short. It's more of a subtleness. But I don't know that.
But I think if one were to take account of how many breaths per minute a meditator is breathing at the beginning of the meditation session and towards the end, that there would be more breaths per minute, say within the first 15 minutes than in the second 15 minutes. Wouldn't that be the case?
Kind of a few teachers directed that way.
Yeah.
For those people who cannot find a touching point, just
They say to begin breathing.
breathing long and breathe out long. And it brings it more like a stronger breath, I guess.
Yeah, but what I've heard the advice given when one is observing the breath, as one progresses, it sometimes happens that the breath becomes very subtle, and then one loses track of the breath. One can't find it anymore. And so in order to bring the breath back into awareness, then it is suggested that one take a few deep, long in-breaths and out-breaths just to revive the sensation, to bring back the sensation of the breath at a touching point. So this already presupposes that the breath has become long and quiet. And so then one is deliberately, here one is taking long breaths, but they're not hard breaths, they're very soft, gentle breaths. And so it's advised that one take a few deliberately hard breaths, more forceful breaths, in order to bring back the sensation of the breath coming in and out at the nostrils. Okay.
I also think there's something about the pair, long and short.
Yeah.
And that I think I can identify a long breath only that is different from the way I'm breathing at that point. I didn't express that well. But I only know a long breath in comparison to something else, which may be the breath I'm having now.
Yeah.
I think the breath is shorter in the beginning. But when I deal with long breath, the long breath is something different from this. And then I can start to identify from there. That long breath in and of itself doesn't mean anything to me. Until I deal with there's also a short breath.
I see. Anyway, I don't have any final solution to this problem. So we could just take this as advice to be aware of the breath, whether it's particularly long. When the breath becomes shorter, then be aware that the breath is short. But one has some kind of general awareness of the length of the breath. Okay, then we come to the third aspect of the mindfulness of breathing. This is expressed as experiencing the whole body, I will breathe in. He trains us, experiencing the whole body, I will breathe out. I'm just going to repeat, even though I already explained this point when discussing the Satipatthana Sutta, but I go through it again. There's a difference of interpretation between the explanation coming out from works like the Visuddhimagga and what seems to be the intuitive meaning of this expression. The Visuddhimagga raises the question, what is meant by the whole body here? The Pali uses the expression sabakaya, which means literally whole body, entire body. Then it replies that the in and out breathing is a body. In fact, that's said in the sutta itself. It's a body amongst the bodies. And so what is meant by the whole body is the whole course of the in-breath and the whole course of the out-breath. And so when one is being aware of the whole body, when one is experiencing the whole body, this means that one should be aware of the beginning, middle, and end of the in-breath. And as one breathes out, one should be aware of the beginning, middle, and end of the out-breath. And so the whole body is the entirety of one breath cycle. Beginning, middle, end. Beginning, middle, end. And so to experience the whole body means to be aware of the entire cycle of an in-breath and an out-breath. But the expression experiencing the whole body, literally, or as I said, literally it means the entire body. First, literally it means the entire body. And then the word here that's translated experiencing is in Pali, it's pati sangvedi. It's related to a verb, pati sangvedeti. And now we know from other contexts in which this verb is used that the word refers to a very concrete mode of feeling, a very concrete mode of experiencing. Even experiencing sensations. We have vimutti sukham pati sangvedeti. The Buddha, after his enlightenment, he sits experiencing the bliss of liberation. And so the word pati sangvedeti suggests something different from simply being aware of, as though one were being aware of the breath coming in and out. But it suggests more experiencing. And experiencing would be something that is done, it makes sense to speak of experiencing as something that takes place in the entire body. Whereas if one is following the whole breath as it comes in and out, then one is being aware of the breath. Well, one could also be experiencing it as it comes in and out. It's not just being aware of it with the mind, but also experiencing it as at the level of sensation. So it could also work with it could also work in relation to the breath. It could also work in relation to the body understood as the whole cycle of in and out breathing. But I still think it makes more sense if we understand it in relation to the whole body. And so the way I would understand this, and again this is my own personal opinion, and coming from somebody who's not a meditation master, I would understand it to mean that at the same time that, or as one is breathing in and out, with the attention focused on a particular spot where one experiences the breath most clearly, most distinctly, one is also becoming more subtly aware of the presence of the body. And so one doesn't shift the attention away from the breath. One keeps the attention on the breath in the place where it stands out most distinctly. Around the nostrils, inside the nostrils, below the nostrils. But at the same time, one is now experiencing the body more completely, at greater, to a fuller degree. Okay, and then Another thing to notice in relation to this particular passage is that we have a change in the verb that accompanies each of the formulas. The previous verb was he knows, it's pajanati. But now the verb changes to sikati, he trains. Because now the emphasis is upon making a particular effort to train the mind. And also within the formula, the verb changes from the present tense to the future tense. Because when one is making the determination to train, that means one is resolving that I will do this. And so experiencing the whole body, I will breathe in, he trains thus. Experiencing the whole body, I will breathe out, he trains thus. And so, at the beginning of each breath, one makes this determination to experience the whole body as one breathes in, to experience the whole body as one breathes out. Then we come to the fourth step in the development of mindfulness of breathing. Again, he trains thus. At this time, it's tranquilizing the bodily formation. I will breathe in. He trains thus, tranquilizing the bodily formation. I will breathe out. Okay, so the first question that comes up is, what is the bodily formation? The sutta itself doesn't provide the answer. It seems that even from an early period there must have been a kind of word commentary going along with the sutta, drawing explanations from other suttas. Because from other suttas we know that the bodily formation, kaya sankhara, is the in and out breathing itself. In some suttas, the distinction is made between three kinds of sankharas: bodily formation, verbal formation, and mental formation. And in this passage, the definition is given: what is the body formation? The bodily formation is in-breathing and out-breathing. Because these things are dependent on the body, and they're bound up with the body. And so here it said that one trains tranquilizing the bodily formation, which means tranquilizing, making more tranquil, making more subtle, making more quiet or quiescent, the in and out breathing. And now the way this should be understood, the way I would understand it, despite what the text says, one doesn't make a deliberate effort to quiet the in and out breathing. In fact, one should not interfere with the breathing in any way generally, but just simply observe the breath at its natural rhythm, its natural rate. But as one goes on observing the breath, as the mind becomes more strongly focused on the breath, more absorbed in the breath, then naturally the breathing quiets down and subsides. And as one passes into called neighborhood concentration, the breathing becomes more quiescent. Then when one passes from neighborhood or access concentration to the first jhana, the breathing becomes more quiescent. When one passes to the second jhana, it becomes still more quiescent. When one enters the third jhana, still more quiescent. And then when one enters the fourth jhana, it's said the breathing stops completely. No more breath in the fourth jhana. So it is said. Okay, so now we've gone through 4 steps, 4 phases, which constitute the basic practice of mindfulness of breathing. And this is the practice that was expounded in the Satipatthana Sutta in the section Mindfulness of the Body. But now this sutta will go on into new territory, not found in these terms in the Satipatthana Sutta. But maybe before I go into the new territory, maybe I just will ask whether there's any questions on anything covered. Okay, in the back. Why don't you mention your name so I will...
My name is Brandon. Brandon.
Brandon.
Yeah. I'm not sure how relevant this is, but I notice sometimes while in meditation, my hands being together, I'll notice that as I get more deeply concentrated in the mindfulness of breathing, I don't notice my hands touching each other anymore, like my senses become dull.
Yeah.
You know, does that fall under any of these factors here, or is that something completely different?
It doesn't fall under any of these factors, but it's not something to worry about. It's just quite natural that you won't pay any attention to your hands.
It's just when you mentioned tranquilizing, it brought that to mind to me. You know, I know we're talking about body being the breathing, but it kind of brought that up for me. And I was just wondering if it fell on that. Thank you.
But actually this also brings up a good point, or a point that I'll offer just some thought on. Even though it says in the sutta, what is the bodily formation, kaya sankhara, then the answer is given in and out breathing. It seems that we might perhaps understand this word, kaya sankhara, to have a wider sense, not fully explained in the suttas. Maybe because they didn't have the vocabulary at that time to express this. But we might consider many other aspects of we call bodily sensations, bodily processes, also to come under the rubric of the bodily formations. And so there are many different sensations bound up with the body, bodily processes, heartbeat, your doctor, give me some.
Saliva formation.
Okay, saliva formation.
Tears.
Yeah. Maybe urine production.
You mentioned the heartbeat and
Yeah.
breathing.
I know sometimes for me I can notice blood flow like in the ears, especially when first starting meditation and the heart is still racing.
Yeah.
You know, I'll get a sensation, you know, between the head and sometimes the sinuses, you know.
Yeah. So there could be many other types of bodily processes that settle down with the progress of the mindfulness of breathing. Any other questions? Okay, so now we'll come into the next section. So he trains thus, again it's still deliberately training. Experiencing rapture, I will breathe in. He trains thus. Experiencing rapture, I will breathe out. He trains thus. Okay, now the later part of the sutta is going to explain that the first 4 aspects of mindfulness of breathing constitute kai anupassana, that is contemplation of the body, which is the first foundation of mindfulness. And now with this passage here, with this sentence here, we begin the next tetrad, the next group of 4. And this group of 4 will come under the heading of contemplation of feeling. And so the contemplation of feeling section begins with this training, experiencing rapture. I will breathe in, experiencing rapture. I will breathe out. And technically, the word that's translated as rapture here is the Pali word piti. And technically, piti is not considered a feeling. And so the question might come to mind, if piti, if rapture is not technically a feeling, then why is it included in the section on contemplation of feeling? The way I would understand it is that rapture and the next factor, translated happiness or pleasure, are very closely connected, such that whenever rapture arises, it's always accompanied by happiness or pleasure. And therefore, to begin the section on contemplation of feeling, the Buddha begins with rapture, because rapture is the strong support for the higher type of pleasure or happiness experienced in meditation. Now, one might think that because the contemplation of feeling follows the contemplation of the body, that therefore we have here a sequence going from bodily contemplation to contemplation of feeling, so that the meditator at a certain point gives up the attention to the mindfulness of breathing, to the awareness of the breath, and instead follows that with the attention to feeling and states related to feeling. But this would not be a correct understanding. The way we should see this, rather, all 4, or at least all 3 of these the first 3 foundations of mindfulness are interlocking, interrelated. One begins with the bodily contemplation because the in-breathing and out-breathing, it's a bodily process. And so first one has to attend to the bodily process of in and out breathing. But as one progresses in the course of the practice, then certain other experiences become more prominent. And so one of the first experiences that become prominent, as the mind settles down on the object and becomes able to follow the breath in and out for a continuous period, that one experiences this powerful current of joy of running through the body. And this joy, as one goes on following the breath, can become more and more powerful till it's felt as just suffusing, even animating the whole body. And it can turn into a current of exhilaration, elation, exaltation. And so these are experiences of rapture. And so as these occur, then one experiences them and one will observe them as part of one's experience. But one still should keep the mind on the in and out breath, since that is the object of meditation and practicing mindfulness of breathing. And now this experience of rapture, this becomes more and more prominent as the concentration becomes stronger. And then the rapture becomes very prominent, but also very tranquil as one enters into the first jhana. And so one could take experiencing rapture, I will breathe in, experiencing rapture, I will breathe out, to apply especially to the experience of the first jhana and also the second jhana, which also has rapture. But we should not think that one experiences rapture only in the jhanas, but even from an early phase in the development of the meditation, as soon as the mind settles down and remains continuously with its object, then little spurts of rapture start to occur. Then these little spurts become joined into a continuous stream, and then this continuous stream swells out into a powerful current, and then that current is what sweeps one into the jhana. Okay, so experiencing rapture, and accompanying that rapture is this superior, this refined feeling of pleasure, which is what is called happiness. In Pali, this is sukha. It's the opposite of dukkha. Okay, so as the rapture becomes more subtle, more refined, then the pleasure that's accompanying that rapture will become more prominent, will thrust itself upon one's awareness. And so then one will be mindfully breathing in, mindfully breathing out, but one is aware that one is experiencing happiness or pleasure. Okay, then we come to the third phase in the mindfulness, in the contemplation of feeling. Experiencing the mental formation. He trains us experiencing the mental formation. I will breathe in, experiencing the mental formation. I will breathe out. What's called the mental formation here in Pali, this is Chitta Sankhara. Then if we try to figure out from the Anapanasati Sutta what is meant by Chitta Sankhara, one can't do it. There's no clue in the sutta itself. But other suttas tell us that the Chitta Sankhara is feeling and perception. Okay, so since this is the exercise and contemplation of feeling, of the two factors included in the Chitta Sankhara, the one that's relevant is feeling rather than perception. And so now one makes the determination in mindfully breathing in and out, I will experience the mental formation. That means I will experience the feeling. I try to understand what is meant here by experiencing the feeling, since we already have experiencing pleasure or experiencing happiness. So what is different about this? One thing that's different is that as feeling, the mental formation can include any kind of feeling that's experienced in the course of meditation, whether it's pleasant feeling, painful feeling, or neutral feeling. One should experience it. Particularly, this is for a meditator who is gaining the jhanas. As he goes into the third jhana, he'll be experiencing happiness, which is included in the second step. But when he goes from the third jhana to the fourth jhana, then in the fourth jhana he'll experience that feeling which is called neither painful nor pleasant feeling. This is the neutral feeling. So that neutral feeling will also be included under the mental formation. It might also be the case, and this is a little speculative here, that what is happening when one is experiencing the mental formation, no matter what feeling one is experiencing, one is not attending to it as a particular feeling, as either pleasant feeling or painful feeling, or neither painful nor pleasant feeling. But one is simply being aware of it as a particular feeling. Did that sound contradictory? One is okay. One is not attending to it as a specific feeling, pleasant feeling, painful feeling, either pleasant or painful feeling. But one is just attending to it as the general phenomenon, feeling. Okay, in that case, that should make a meaningful contrast. Okay, then this third phase moves into now the fourth phase, which is tranquilizing the mental formation. I will breathe in. Tranquilizing the mental formation. I will breathe out. Now, as one practices the mindfulness of breathing, then the feelings become more refined and more subtle. They start to become more peaceful, more tranquil. And so one moves first from a mixture of maybe a coarse, painful feeling, sometimes pleasant feelings, sometimes neutral feelings. As one becomes more focused on the meditation subject, as the mind merges with it, becomes more absorbed in it, then one moves into a continuum of pleasant feelings. Then as one continues to observe the object, then that pleasant feeling, which might be somewhat rough at the beginning, becomes more quiescent, more peaceful, until that pleasant feeling will move into the pleasure or happiness of the first jhana, then into the second jhana, into the third jhana, and then one will move from the happiness of the third jhana into the neutral feeling, the feeling neither pleasant nor painful of the fourth jhana. So in this way, the feelings are becoming increasingly more tranquil. Okay, so this takes care of the contemplation of feeling section. And we have to be aware again I have to emphasize this point, that this contemplation of feeling is not something that's taking part separate from the attention to the in and out breathing, which is an exercise in bodily awareness. Okay, now we come to the next group of four, the next tetrad, which is related to the contemplation of mind, Cittanupassana. So the first one is given as Citta Pati Samvedi Asasi Samiti Sikati. Citta Pati Samvedi Pasasi. Citta Pati Samvedi Pasasi Tami Sikati. This translates, experiencing the mind I will breathe in. He trains thus. Experiencing the mind I will breathe out. So what is meant by experiencing the mind? I think we have to relate this to the passage in the Satipatthana Sutta on contemplation of the mind. If you remember, in the contemplation of the mind, the meditator knows when there's a mind with lust, that it's a mind with lust. If it's a mind without lust, that it's a mind without lust. Similarly, with hatred, without hatred, with delusion, without delusion. Okay, so the way I would understand it, here we are not coming to, we're not yet at an advanced stage in the mindfulness of breathing, but we're still at a relatively early stage. But as one goes on attending to one's in-breath and out-breath, various thoughts, various states of mind are arising. And so one is now observing these states of mind and knowing whether they are with lust, hatred, and delusion, without lust, hatred, and delusion. Okay, so in this way one is experiencing the mind and knowing the state of mind. Now, as the meditation starts to advance, as the concentration improves, then the joy and rapture start to enter into the mind. And this joy and rapture, this is what is being expressed here as gladdening the mind, I will breathe in. Gladdening the mind, I will breathe out. And so we could see here that there's a connection between this part of the practice, which falls under the heading of contemplation of mind, and the statement in the previous section, experiencing rapture I will breathe in, experiencing rapture I will breathe out. So they're not two separate phases, but they're actually correlates of one another. Okay, so gladdening the mind, I breathe that in, gladdening the mind, I breathe out. This signifies the stage in the practice where rapture is becoming more prominent and is streaming into the mind and then flooding the mind, uplifting the mind, and then pushing the mind into the first and second jhana, which are characterized by the presence of rapture. Okay, now in the third phase here, we have the expression, he trains thus concentrating the mind, I will breathe in. He trains thus concentrating the mind, I will breathe out. I think this statement is made, or this step of training is introduced in order to stress the necessity of pulling the mind away from its attraction to the experience of rapture. That experience of rapture is indicated in gladdening the mind. And so when the mind becomes uplifted by rapture, if one isn't careful, one could be carried away by that experience of rapture, and then one becomes attached to it. And that attachment becomes an obstacle to one's further progress. And so here the text emphasizes the importance of bringing the mind back to the main meditation object and focusing the mind more consistently on that object by concentrating the mind while breathing in and breathing out. And then the same process is carried further in the fourth step, which is called liberating the mind, I will breathe in. Liberating the mind, I will breathe out. Okay. We might think that liberating the mind here means attaining full liberation or final liberation. But that is not the way the word liberation is explained by the commentaries, and I agree with them. The way the word liberating the mind was explained here. Rather, this means not the liberation of the mind from greed, hatred, and ignorance, the liberation of the mind from the defilements, but rather it means on the spot, as one is meditating, one is liberating the mind temporarily from the coarser states that prevent one from reaching the more refined stages of meditation. So, as one begins the practice and as one's concentration improves, one has to liberate the mind from the 5 hindrances in order to enter into the first jhana. Then when one enters the first jhana, one has to liberate the mind from thought and examination in order to enter the second jhana. Then, to progress beyond the second jhana, one has to liberate the mind from piti, from rapture, in order to enter the third jhana. And then in order to go into the fourth jhana, one has to liberate the mind even from that very refined happiness of the third jhana. Okay, so now we come to we've completed the 4 phases, 4 aspects concerned with contemplation of the mind. Now it seems to me, and again I have to say this is my personal impression, but also I have some support for this in the commentaries, that these first 3 tetrads, or first 12 aspects of mindfulness of breathing, are concerned primarily with samadhi meditation, primarily with samatha, with tranquility meditation. There's a way one could understand some of these formulations in relation to insight or vipassana. But I would say that the emphasis here is on increasing the degree of samadhi, of concentration. We see this in the first tetrad. We have a movement from simple awareness of in and out breathing to finally tranquilizing the bodily formations. In the second tetrad, we see a movement from rapture, which is connected with the first and second jhanas, to pleasure or happiness, distinctive of the third jhana, and then to tranquilizing the mental formation, to tranquilizing all feelings, which will lead into deeper degree of samadhi. And then in the third tetrad, we move from simply being aware of the mind, experiencing the mind, to gladdening the mind, which means intensifying the piti, the rapture and joy, or joy, to concentrating the mind, and then to liberating the mind in the sense of removing the impediments to further progress. So these first three tetrads just present from different points of view, from different standpoints, what is essentially the same process of the progressive movement from a coarser level of consciousness to a deeper level of concentration. The fourth tetrad is quite different. This tetrad is concerned entirely with insight, with vipassana. And thus we have, he trains us contemplating impermanence. I breathe in. He trains thus contemplating impermanence. I breathe out. I will breathe out. So this is we would say, the gateway to the practice of vipassana meditation, to gain the awareness of impermanence. And what is meant by impermanence here is not something like the gross impermanence of life, because we all have to die, the impermanence of societies and planets and world systems, but this is the subtle impermanence of all bodily and mental formations. The fact that all bodily and mental formations are subject to arising and passing away. When one enters upon the contemplation of impermanence, generally it has to be based upon some degree of samadhi or concentration, but one then takes the concentrated mind and then one bends it back in order to examine one's bodily and mental experience, first in terms of the five aggregates, so that one will distinguish within this experience of concentration. One will break it down, investigate, dissect it, analyze it into bodily form, feeling, perception, volitions, and consciousness. And one becomes aware of the distinctive characteristics of each of these five aggregates. And so one can direct the attention to whichever of the aggregates one wants to. If one wants to focus on the body, one will focus on body. Or one could shift the point of focus to feeling, to perception, to the volitional formations, to consciousness. Then one goes on observing whichever of the aggregates one chooses. Usually one begins with the bodily aggregate, because that's easiest to observe. As one focuses upon it with the concentrated mind, one sees that the different bodily phenomena are constantly arising and passing away. And this is the distinctive feature of the contemplation of impermanence, observing the moment-to-moment arising and passing away of the five aggregates. Moving from the body, then to feelings, then to perceptions, to volitional formations, to consciousness. Each one, whichever one focuses upon, one sees it arising and passing away. So that is observing or contemplating impermanence. Then the second phase is called contemplating viraga. This is an interesting word. Viraganupassi. The word viraga is often used in the text, in the suttas, with the meaning dispassion. Whenever you see in English translations the word dispassion, you could almost be certain that that is a translation of viraga. But the word viraga is also used to signify an aspect of impermanence. And the question might come up, how can impermanence and dispassion, how can one word represent these two ideas which are quite different? The answer comes from considering the literal meaning of viraga. The word viraga is composed of a prefix v, which here means separation or removal. And then the stem of it, its stem is raga. The word raga originally meant dye, the color used in dye. Maybe do you know the Indian classical music, the different compositions in Indian classical music? They call them ragas. That word raga used to indicate the musical composition originally meant color, because each composition has its own special color according to the particular scale on the basis of which it's created. Actually, a raga is not a fixed composition, but it's simply a scale which is used as a basis for improvisation. But that particular scale creates the color of the piece which is played on the basis of that scale. And so we have different ragas, different you can't call them compositions, different musical creations which differ because of their color. Maybe in English we would call it the flavor rather than the color. Or maybe the tone, even the word tone we could use for color as well as the characteristic of a musical production. Okay, so the word raga originally means color, and it becomes used to signify, on the one hand, human passion, human desire is considered to be the flooding of the mind with a dye that colors it. And so when the mind is purged of passion, then it is like a piece of cloth from which the dye has been removed, which has been a piece of cloth which has been cleansed of its dye. So in this way, viraga comes to mean dispassion. But also, when a piece of cloth loses its color, then it fades out, right? And so when phenomena pass away, they fade out of existence. Except that the fading of a piece of cloth takes place over a long time, whereas phenomena fade out of existence the moment after they come into existence. Okay, so now what is taking place as one moves from contemplation of impermanence to viraganupassi, contemplation of fading away, now one is focusing upon the fact that all of these bodily and mental phenomena passed away. One is no longer attending to the dual aspects of arising and passing away, but simply to the aspect of passing away, that everything that arises passes away. And so one is just observing the passing away of phenomena. One is just observing the breaking up and dissolution of phenomena. Okay, so we could say that contemplating fading away is actually a more specific aspect of the contemplation of impermanence. So in general it falls under the heading of the contemplation of impermanence. But to distinguish them, I would say that contemplating impermanence is contemplating both arising and passing, whereas contemplating fading away is just focusing on the aspect of the passing away or dissolving of phenomena. Then we come to the third aspect. This is contemplating cessation. I will breathe in. Contemplating cessation. I will breathe out. So what is distinctive of contemplating cessation? I would say that here one is focusing upon the fact that all of these phenomena that have faded out of existence no longer exist. So this is bold-facing or underlining the aspect of impermanence. That what has faded out is no longer present. It's gone, vanished, absent. Okay, and so one moves through the sequence arising and passing away, then simply dissolving and passing away, and then third, passing away and no longer existent. And then in the fourth phase, contemplating relinquishment. This means that one relinquishes the attachment to these phenomena that are passing away, dissolving, and ceasing to exist. Okay, maybe I'll ask whether there's any questions now on anything that I've covered so far. Okay, Richard? Jin will give you the microphone.
In contrasting this section, contemplating phenomena dhammas, with the Satipatthana Sutta, where the dhammas included the seven enlightenment factors, here the enlightenment factors come later. Here the emphasis is on impermanence, and then within impermanence it seems to be on their fading away and ceasing. Yet, if I sit contemplating phenomena, they arise as well as cease. And is there a reason why the emphasis is so much on the cessation of the relinquishment, as opposed to seeing it arise as well?
I think the way I would understand, I would say because the first three Satipatthanas have placed the emphasis on developing strong concentration. Okay, so now on the basis of that concentration, one can move. Well, let me just say that also that I think we have to understand even this system of anapanasati is a way of compressing the entire course of practice. So if one were to take the full course of practice, one would also have to bring in the contemplation of dependent origination, which will show how phenomena arise, and one would also have to understand that. But what I think is that because the first three sections here have put so much emphasis on developing strong concentration, that now it's pretty much presupposed that on the basis of that strong samadhi, one could move very quickly into this radical contemplation of impermanence, and then moving from impermanence through the other stages in order to arrive more quickly at the results, at the fruits. This is the way I would understand it.
And also there's no mention of anatta or dukkha as the principal insights.
Yeah. In order to really complete the practice, one has to bring in all three characteristics. But I think the Buddha gave different presentations on different occasions because of either the needs of the people being trained, or else simply with the presupposition that a complete exposition would bring in the other aspects which have been deleted, omitted for the purpose of being able to complete an exposition within a fixed time frame.
One other thing about the experiencing the body and the tranquilizing the bodily formation, I guess you gave these two interpretations. It seems to me, if I'm not mistaken, that even though it's fruitful to examine, well, what does it specifically mean, as one moves along in practice, that going back to the mindful he breathes in and mindful he breathes out, if that's the foundation, then one will be mindful of the in and out breathing, and one will be mindful of the sensations in the body that will come with practice. So whether that specific statement means the in and out breathing, or whether it means the bodily the whole body experience, is sort of like both will be included in the end of as part of practice. So it's not so important whether you mean one or the other. I'd be interested in if you have some comment about that.
I'm not quite sure that I got the point.
Well, when you look at the text, experiencing the whole body, for example, you mentioned the Visuddhimagga interprets it as the whole body being in and out breathing.
Right, yeah.
And that's what that particular text means here, and then you give a different interpretation of the experiencing all the bodies, and as you breathe in and out, the whole experience of the body. And it seems like with practice, both of those experiences will come if you're mindful as you breathe in, mindful as you breathe out. Yeah. And is it really important? Fundamentally, is it really very important to make that distinction? Because both are important. Being mindful, you're going to experience both of those.
Yeah, exactly. And also, what I have to add is that in order to practice, to improve the concentration with mindfulness of breathing, one has to be able to follow the course of the whole in-breath and out-breath through all three stages, beginning, middle, end. If one is just occasionally thinking when breathing in breath, and then through the rest of the breath the mind wanders, then one comes to the out-breath and one just thinks out-breath and then lets the mind wander, then one will not be strengthening the power of samadhi, the concentration. So one has to be able to follow the whole in-breath, the whole out-breath. And so, whether one understands the expression the whole breath, whether one understands that as the entire course of one in-breath and one out-breath, the entire cycle of in-breath and out-breath, or as the entire physical body, is irrelevant to the fact that in order to strengthen the concentration, one has to be able to follow the whole in-breath and out-breath. The question is just what is actually meant by the expression, the whole body. And also I think that if one brings out the fact that the whole body can mean the body in its entirety, then it can support the mode of practice that allows one to experience the entire body while breathing in and out, and doesn't instill upon one a kind of anxiety that I have to be aware exclusively of the breath. I'm not allowed to attend to anything else that's taking place in the body. So what I would say is that the body, the awareness of the body, can be present at the same time that there is a focused attention on the breath in the area of the nostrils. And I think one factor that's maybe caused people to feel some conflict or tension between the two is a particular doctrine that gets presented in the Abhidhamma, which is that one could only be aware of one thing at a time. And so if one is aware of what is going on in the rest of the body, that would suggest that one is not aware of the breath. And if one is really, truly aware of the breath, then one should not be experiencing anything in the body, the rest of the body, just only the sensations taking place around this area. But if one doesn't subscribe to that particular doctrine, that particular Abhidhamma doctrine, that particular way of interpreting the Abhidhamma, then one could admit the possibility that, let's say, that the field of experience can be somewhat complex, and so the mind could be focused on a particular object, like the breath, without having to exclude the awareness of the rest of the body.
Regarding the 8 steps that you mentioned, beginning with the chanting, what is all this recorded source that mentions counting in the beginning?
What are the sources for that?
Yes.
One finds it certainly in the Visuddhimagga. One also finds it in an older work, this is in the southern tradition, an older work than the Visuddhimagga, the Vimuttimagga, called, it's been translated as the Path of Freedom, the Path to Liberation. One also finds several of these factors, or several of those steps, in the Yogacara Bhumi. I haven't read it myself, but Venerable Dhammadippa had mentioned this during his talks in November.
About Citta Sankara in the second canto, you said certain source interpreted as a feeling and perception.
Yeah.
Again, what source?
One sutta that gives that definition is Majjhima Nikaya number 44. It also comes someplace, a few other places, but I remember Majjhima Nikaya number 44.
Thank you.
There are some questions in the back. Maybe pass them. Mike to the back. Right, yeah.
I find it difficult to understand why we try so hard to intellectualize what the Buddha was trying to say, as opposed to just doing the experience of what he is saying
Yeah.
in order to understand in everything. It seems to me that if we follow the observation training,
Yeah.
because I see, the way I see what he's saying is that the training process is in the observation,
Yeah.
that if we utilize that,
Yeah.
that he was putting it, the breath as in the simplest form,
Yeah.
that merely what he was saying is to train our observation
Yeah.
from the very basic of something
Yeah.
all the way to its final experience
Hmm.
to the end,
Right.
and realizing that it is then gone.
Yeah.
And that everything that we observe to its fullest extent
Yeah.
becomes impermanent.
Yeah.
And that's the process that I'm seeing here. It isn't really very intellectual. It's
Yeah.
more of, if I just do it, like the simple thing of a raindrop falling into a puddle,
Yeah.
and the observation of that raindrop falling and the ripple, and just observing the whole process, and then it's gone.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm getting. That is really what this whole explanation is.
Yeah.
Training the concentration on the whole experience,
Yeah.
the whole body of the experience, and then it is gone.
Yeah.
Am I seeing it?
Yeah, I think you expressed it very beautifully. But let me just say that, of course, this is a course of practice, something to be put into practice and to be experienced and to realize within oneself. It's not just a philosophical system to be explained and to be interpreted and to be discussed. But still, it is divided up into 16 phases, 16 aspects, and some of these terms and expressions are not so clear. And so what I just tried to do is to explain them, not to intellectualize them in the sense that I'm trying to create a philosophical system out of them, but just to explain what these terms mean by way, what these expressions mean in terms of actual practice and experience. Yeah. Your simile of the raindrop falling into the pool of water very illustrates the point very beautifully. And Brandon, did you have another question?
No.
I thought.
I didn't understand the difference between contemplating on cessation and contemplating relinquishment. What is the difference?
Oh. Okay. Now we're a little afraid to say anything.
Well, maybe I should say this first. If you just tell me to focus on the raindrop, I don't think I understand what it means. And for some people with lower ability, intuitive ability, it needs more intellectualized explanation, something like that. But I really admire people who can just get it. I just don't get it.
Yeah. Okay. The third one is contemplating cessation. contemplate cessation. This is nirod, or nirodhanupassi. So cessation means ceasing to be. And so now one is contemplating the bodily and mental formations, the five aggregates, as they're passing away. In the way I understand how cessation differs from fading away, from viraga, the cessation is a little difference in emphasis. The emphasis is on the absence of being that occurs, the passing out of existence.
Yeah, but what's the difference
Okay,
between that?
yeah, I'm coming to the fourth. Yeah, I'm coming to this. Okay, now the fourth is patinisagga, which almost literally might be translated letting go, releasing. And so this is, as one contemplates the cessation of the phenomena, then one's attachment to them, one gives up one's attachment to them. And so this is the relinquishing. One is relinquishing one's clinging to the five aggregates, and one is also relinquishing the five aggregates themselves, and that one no longer has any clinging to them.
But if it's already cessation, why?
No, because the cessation means here the cessation of, one is observing the cessation of the five aggregates.
Cessation of five aggregates?
Yeah.
All?
Yes. One is because when one takes the concentrated mind and bends it back on the field of experience, investigates the field of experience in terms of the five aggregates, one sees the five aggregates are impermanent, arising and passing away. They're subject to fading away, they pass out of existence. One sees that the five aggregates cease to be. Okay, so that is, you could say, the causal, maybe we could call this the causal stage, seeing cessation, contemplating cessation. Then as one contemplates the cessation of the five aggregates, then one recognizes that these things that are impermanent, subject to fading away and cessation, are not worth holding to. And when one recognizes this, then one lets go of one's attachment to them. Any further questions? Okay, Richard, do you have a question?
Yeah, just
Okay.
on that same point, would it be true to say, would it be correct to say then that unless you reach relinquishment, then the aggregates, even though you've seen them, you've seen their sensation, unless you relinquish them, they will arise again?
Yeah.
I mean, that's an important step.
Yeah. Of course, in their natural course of unfolding, the aggregates arise and pass away from moment to moment. And so they'll go on existing as long as one is alive, arising and ceasing. But if one doesn't contemplate their impermanence, their cessation and so on, then the underlying attachment to them will remain intact. And then that attachment, then that becomes the force that maintains the continuity of samsara. But when one contemplates, especially the cessation, the passing out of existence, then one develops this, call this nibbida, a kind of disenchantment with them. And then through that disenchantment, then one lets go of them. Okay, then we will stop here. And then next week there won't be a class, but we have the class 7th, 14th, 21st.
I want to mention after this, take your video. As someone can do video.
No, next week there's no class. The next class will be on the 21st.
You mentioned about ask
Whether somebody's experienced. Okay, you help me. Yeah, then one thing I wanted to ask before we just do the sharing of the merits, is there anybody here who's experienced in making videos with, is it FLV, is that the program? Making FLV file videos? Anybody have that experience? And would like to help us make a video? You do. It didn't work. But are you experienced in taking a fresh video? Because it's only 5 minutes, I could do it over. Okay, so then if you could just stay a few minutes, then I could just ask you to help or something. Okay, let us dedicate the merits, share the merits. Akasata Shabhumata Deva Naga Mahitika Punyantang Anumoditva Shirang Rakantu Sasanam Akasata Shabhumata Deva Naga Mahitika Punyantang Anumoditva Shirang Rakantu Desanam Akasata Chabhumata Deva Naga Mahitika Punyantang Anumoditva Chiran Rakantu Manparam Etavata Cha Amhehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Deva Anumodantu Sabbe Bhuta Anumodantu Sabbe Sata Anumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Pavagupadaya Vichihetato Etantare Satakayupapanna Rupya Rupicha Asanya Sanyino Tukha Pamuchantu Pusantu Nibutin